Thank you. So welcome all this morning to the Tourism 2030 conference. My name's Valerie Smith. I'm just going to take us through today, if I can work the button. A bit of an overview about where we are now and spend a bit of time just prefacing some early thinking that we have in our next draft tourism strategy and finish with what our thoughts of the period towards 2030 might be. So it'll be no surprises to anyone in the room how important tourism is in the Territory. Provides 1 in 8 jobs in the Northern Territory and adds $2.1 billion into our economy each year. So this is a big, really important industry. It's important too, I think, to note that 51% of people who come to the Territory for a visit are coming for a holiday. That's actually a higher share than anywhere else in Australia other than Tasmania. We've also got a fairly high share of business travel here, and that's because we have a comparatively low share of visiting friends and relatives. No surprise, we've got a small resident population, so it's a small draw for people to come, but there's some fundamental differences in our industry here. Quick look at our latest performance. What we've seen recently is there's been declines in non-holiday travel to the Territory. That's related, obviously, in the top end to the big INPEX project and the decline of those FIFO workers. Even though our holiday numbers have been increasing recently, and you can see they're up 13% domestic for the year ending September and 5% internationally, that increase hasn't been enough to fill the hole, plug the gap we've had from some of those INPEX declines. If we look at a bit of a longer term trend, what you can see since around 2014 for the Territory, our domestic numbers have gone up and down a little bit, but they were in a slide up until the most recent quarterly data. You can also see our international numbers have been reasonably flat there for some period of time. And looking at our expenditure data, you can see that downturn in the domestic is more apparent when you look at our expenditure data. So between late 2016 up until mid-18, we had falls. It appears that that's slowed and potentially stopped now with expenditure just upticking more recently. Now these numbers are for all purposes of visit. So remember I said 51% are holiday. So if we just focus now on them, and this is people when we ask them, they say their primary purpose of visit to come to the Territory is for holiday. So we can see that market's a lot more volatile than the numbers overall. And the number of people coming here for holidays domestically is at quite a high level compared to the time period we're looking at. Internationally, it's a different story. So our numbers internationally are about 50,000 less than they were pre the global financial crisis. If we took this graph and projected it back forward, we're about 150,000 less internationally than we were at the peak, which was around the Sydney Olympics before we had that September 11 slight disruption of the tourism industry. And if we look at holiday visitor expenditure, you can see the recent uptick in domestic holiday visitor expenditure, and it's back over $800 million now and back above the range we need to get to our 2020 NT tourism goal. So if we look into the regions a little bit more, you can see holiday, and these are just holiday figures again. So holiday visitors in the top end, been about 400 and 450,000 for the past 4.5 years. The centre region, holiday visitors just below 300,000, and you can see the numbers in the centre have been growing over the past year and a half. This one's probably of more interest to most people here, so I might spend a bit more time on this. This is looking at the sub-regions which make up. So one of the key interesting facts that I take away from this, Uluru, or our Lassiter sub-region, is now the most visited holiday destination in the Northern Territory. So it's overtaken Darwin for the first time ever. You can see, if you look at that longer term trend over on the right, that Darwin's holiday visitation remains lower than it was pre the global financial crisis. You can see the visitor numbers in Kakadu have slid since 2016. This is people who are staying overnight, so there is a difference from the park entry, which looks at everyone who goes in. But overnight visitors have slid since 2016. They're at record lows. Outer Darwin, which includes Litchfield National Park, I think it likely if this trend continues, they're going to have more overnight visitors than in Kakadu sub-region. And that demonstrates why the Minister was talking about the importance of that reinvestment into Kakadu. We need to turn these figures around. Turning around Kakadu will have benefits for Darwin and the top end more generally. And you can see visitation into Alice Springs has slid up until about 2014 and it's been fairly flat since then. So with those figures in mind, if we look at industry sentiment, and this is the quarterly poll we put out to operators such as yourselves, one of the questions we ask is, what's your forward projections for the next year? How do you feel about the industry going forward? I think it'll be no surprise to anyone in this room that sentiment, particularly in the top end, is low at the moment. And part of what this conference is about today is giving you some tools, hopefully, that you can take away and start addressing some of these challenges. So if we look at aviation capacity over the coming year, first thing you'll notice about this is, it's highly seasonal. You can see the normal seasonal patterns coming into play there. We're projecting the normal boom around July and August. But we did have a reduced capacity over the wet season this year compared to the most recent couple of years. We didn't have 10,000 FIFOs flying back and forth, so that's certainly playing into those figures for Darwin. In terms of where we're going, and Tony Quarmby is going to talk a lot more about turbocharging tourism, and we had the Minister reporting earlier on visitor numbers from our actual campaign activity. But if we look at our aggregate numbers overall, we'd wanted to attract new holiday visitors to mitigate some of that decline in the loss of business and employment visitors, particularly in the top end. For the figures for the first half of the 18-19 year, we've already achieved more than half of that additional visitors. So I think we're in a good space for this time of year, and as we get further into the turbocharging delivery, we're going to see more of that benefit coming in the next couple of quarters. So now we know where we're at, let's have a bit of a look about where we might be going forward and talk about the new tourism strategy. It's been co-developed and co-authored, as you know, with industry, and I'm very grateful that Glenn, where are you? There you are, is sitting on the project steering committee for that project. He's been a great help, and thanks, Glenn, for your time. Many of you have been involved in the strategy development to date, primarily in the workshops and forums and letting us know your thoughts. That process kicked off around August last year, and thank you again for all of your input. The strategy is not going to be out there on its own. It's part of a larger strategic context piece for the Northern Territory. We've got some big pieces of work underway in other areas, such as the Aboriginal tourism strategy. There's an events strategy being developed, a business events strategy as well. We're not going to repeat elements of those strategies in the tourism strategy, so that most of the event-specific data and information, for example, will be in the events strategy, but we will pick up the key themes. And this is just sharing where our current thinking is. So again, this is just draft, these next couple of slides, but we did want to take this opportunity to share with you where our current thinking is, which is that we'll have these 5 key priorities, which we've picked ones that will make a material difference on our trajectory towards the next decade. Reflecting back on the last strategy, I was involved in developing that one as well. One of the things I think it did is it became almost an encapsulation of everything we did and didn't perhaps focus enough our attentions on things that would make a difference. So we've had a change in thought about how we might prepare this strategy, and we're focusing in just on those key priority areas you can see there. They are supported by four pillars which underpin the strategy, and a really important one of those, of course, being marketing. So the key priorities are of equal importance, but I might just spend a bit of time talking about, I'm going to call it the first one, but it's not the highest priority one, but it's about growing investment in our products, our assets and our regions. So a key platform that we're talking about there is a renewed focus on enterprise development and specifically on the regions, and creation of individual destination management plans for regions in the Territory. So we'll be developing those in partnership with the RTOs, with TCA and Tourism Top End, and certainly with tourism operators as well. A key other new thing, I guess, we're talking about doing is a facilitated investment process within the NT government. So that's about how we can speed up bigger projects, both government-led projects, but also private sector projects, and help get through some of those planning, regulatory, licensing issues in a more timely way. And again, I've got draft all over this. I can't stress that enough. I'm glad the minister's left the room. I don't think she's seen this yet, so oh well. We're going to, in this strategy, have targets for both total and holiday visitation. They appeal differently to different sectors of the tourism industry. I was talking to an accommodation provider last night who mentioned that he's 30% holiday only in his business, the rest being corporate. So depending on your business, one or more of those one might be more interesting than the other. We're going to have both. We'll have targets both for domestic and international. So overall, our goal is the 2030 goal we're putting forward is an extra 500,000 visitors above the baseline forecast over that time period. So that's a pretty bold number. I was down in Katherine the other day, Vane, I can see you nodding, and we ran those figures past some of the guys in Katherine, and I think there was a little bit of trepidation in the room about what that might mean in terms of infrastructure requirements. If we're going to put another 500,000 visitors into the Territory each year, that's a lot of new hotels. We need to soak up the capacity in our existing hotels, but there will be new hotels needed. We're going to need a lot more aviation services. We're going to need a lot more businesses. We're going to need a lot more infrastructure in our parks, so we don't just load those people into the same destinations. In terms of holiday visitors, it's about an extra 300,000 holiday visitors we're targeting. And if we look at expenditure, the expenditure target would be between 1.38 billion and 1.73 billion for holiday visitor expenditure. At the moment, we're slightly under 1.2, so that's a big increase in return, I guess, back into the industry and back into the economy. So as part of this, we're going to take the time during the strategy's implementation to have a 3-yearly review process. One of the things, reflecting back on the last strategy, we had the 2020 goal of a $2.2 billion economy. We achieved it about 5 years early. Go INPEX. We always knew that would come off, but I think in some degrees it did kind of mean that perhaps the focus came off that strategy while the boom was on. This year we'll be reviewing targets during the process to make sure they continue to be relevant. If we achieve the targets early, we're going to raise the bar and give ourselves a bit of a stretch. So from here, we hope to have the draft strategy. It's obviously reasonably finalised form of a draft, or I wouldn't be sharing it with you. It should be finalised in the next couple of months. We certainly want it out by mid-year, so when we get to 1 July, we can hit the ground running from there. That was a pretty brief overview. There's a lot of people from Tourism NT here today. If you want to talk more of us, please come and grab one of us in the break or at one of the networking events, and we'll have a further chat. Thank you.